Hey guys, Luton here and back for another episode of Below the Line. This is a series where each week I put a topic to you guys, you tell me what you think down in the comments below, and then we discuss your comments in the next episode. Last time we were talking about people playing to win. We were talking about people playing by referencing wikis, guides, and generally finding out how to play a game instead of playing it through by learning, by attrition, by failure, and making your own mistakes learning from the game itself. And Jack Froster says, people play different games for different reasons. When I play a competitive game like League of Legends, I love to research, pore over the numbers and stats of items, builds to really min-max experience. However, when I play a game like Hearts of Iron or Minecraft, it's not as high stakes, so I don't really care that much about making mistakes. It's as you said, sometimes it's actually satisfying to make mistakes as it shows the depth of a game, depth of that game has, something that is absent from a lot of AAA titles nowadays. I remember seeing a story of someone's granddad would religiously play a mobile game, racking up a huge score in what's marketed as a pretty straightforward game to distract you for just a moment. Did this guy go up to the wiki for this game to see the best way to get a high score? I'd expect not. It's part of the experience for a lot of people with their games to independently improve over time. And I think that really gets to the core of the whole issue. I mean, that really is what it is. And I think, you know, at the end of the day as well, it's how people want to do it. You know, everybody has different things that they want to get out of a game. Some people always want to go for that 100% completion. They want to get all the bits and pieces. They want to do it perfectly all the way through. And for some people, that is what it is all about. But for a lot of people, it's also about the experience. It's about learning through mistakes. It's about, you know, getting a true impression, a true feel of what that game is all about. Okay, next up, Dax Owns You All, who says, I can weirdly enough very much relate to this topic on the basis of yourself, LT. I never had seen RimWorld before catching it on one of your streams, and the concept of such a game alone is very appealing to me. So I watched the stream, I bought the game, I did a basic construction of my starting colonists, and who I'll use forevermore for purposes of personal narrative, replicated the section of the map that you'd played as well. I had some ideas for how I wanted to lay it all out that slightly expanded upon yours. I'm now 100 hours into this playthrough, and the results have been very enjoyable. This has all come about from my being able to watch you demonstrate a lot of the basics and how a lot of the otherwise mysterious functions worked. The help guide in the top right is complete pish. I've also used the permanent summer mechanic of the plot type to get to grips with the growing system, timings, crop income, etc. So that when I eventually my progress to a random seeded planet, I know all the fundamental basics of how to get going and how to lay out my colonies. So basically an extended tutorial, which is completely understandable if something is difficult as RimWorld. So he says, when we talk about watching something and it possibly ruining it, I couldn't disagree more. Frankly, if this was the case, I certainly wouldn't have racked up this many hours in this space of time and be more than happy to plow hundreds more into it as well. So he goes on, another big example of games that this can be both a help and a hindrance with is Dark Souls. Now, I'm not a big fan of Dark Souls, I haven't really played it, but I can see exactly where he's coming from. I do understand how Dark Souls functions, and so yeah, there is definitely something to be gained from Dark Souls in learning, but also, you know, giving yourself some information. He says, I was initially skeptical of this game despite mountains of praise heaped upon it within my personal friend group. As a result, once I actually picked up a copy of the game 2 years after its release, everything had been seen and done by its community. And this is also the trouble sometimes when you come across games that have been out for a long time. So I stumbled my way through with an upgraded lightning spear. Anybody who knows the game will emphasize how much this must have gone during the SNO boss. Researched the varying weapon and spell types to pick how I like to ideally have played the first time through had I known enough. I don't feel this has cheated my experience, as I'm now well over 1,000 hours of playtime on it over varying platforms and have done things in that game that have brought both sheer frustration and unbridled joy. All in all, I'd love to be skeptical about help guides and wikis, but not everybody does it to ensure success. You can still pick to play how I choose to start playing RimWorld and then fail. I came very close in 2 heatwave incidents during first harvesting, just as you can fail by pre-selecting a build type based on knowledge of the combat system via wiki in Dark Souls. It's entirely down to how much help you want to allow yourself, and if you feel cheated of something as a result of that action with hindsight. Ultimately, in single player games, the only person this ever really affects is you. So is this really something we should be wanting to complain about as a community? Now, I completely agree. The only thing that I don't agree with at all is about the complaining. It's not really a complaint, it's more an observation. It was discussing like, hey, there's more and more of these things out there now, It's more prolific than it ever was, and maybe some people, are too quick to go towards this. And this was something that I had read on various articles. It's something that I started to browse around on forums and see people's discussions and stuff like this. I did whenever I do these kind of topics, I usually do a bit of research by just kind of Googling around, checking dates, kind of gathering a little bit of information, a little bit of talking points for myself. And, so it was just something that I was aware of and thinking about this idea where people kind of almost, they load themselves up with information before they go in. Now that can be a positive thing, but what I was trying to say was that it could also be a negative thing, that without even perhaps realizing it, people could unintentionally be ruining an experience for themselves. That experience of discovery, that experience of frustration and failure. Sometimes negative feelings are not always bad, so a feeling of frustration, disappointment, etc., that can be seen as a bad thing. But also if you have felt that and then you overcome it and achieve, then that's even better feeling than if you had just done it in the first place. It's certainly a better feeling than if you have done that through your own ability rather than just reading how to do something and then doing it that way. And I guess that is the point that I was trying to get across. Okay, Mr. Lesson Dave, I think wiki guides are a handy tool, but personally I try not to use them unless I have to. If I've paid £40 for a game and sunk several hours into it, only to get stuck at a particular stage or struggle with a particular mechanic to the point where it is frustrating me enough to stop enjoying that game, then I'll absolutely use a guide to help me out. I think that's fair enough. Even more so for a narrative-driven game, as not doing so can feel like leaving a book half read. I think also fair. Story is pretty important to me. I'm careful using these guides too, always trying not to read too far ahead for fear of spoilers. Again, I think this, it's a balanced approach. This is a fair way of going. He says, that said, I think devs should themselves supply at least something that explains how a game works. There's nothing worse than this, nobody worse than this frontier developments with Elite Dangerous. Practically nothing exists in the game that tells you what to do, and they hide this under the guise of saying this is a game where you can do whatever you like. I never encountered a game that relies so heavily on user-created external resources like economy trackers and databases. It's pretty much impossible to progress with the game in any way with the tools that the game gives you. And that is actually an interesting topic for even another video another day. This idea of what should a developer supply for their game. I mean, it always makes me think, go back to like Bohemia and Arma not having bipods for, the longest time. It's just insanity. And I do feel sometimes like developers can over-rely on, say, a modding community, or like I was saying, people creating wikis, guides and other things. They just, I can't believe people sit around in a studio and go like, oh, well, we could put this in the game, but someone will probably make a guide, let's just not bother. I can't believe that conversation happens, but sometimes it does feel like it, and yeah, maybe that's one game which is an example, but yeah, maybe guys drop down thoughts below about other games which do an incredibly poor job of explaining their own game to the point where it almost seems strangely deliberate. Okay, and then last for today, Rob, who says, it depends on the game for me. For some games I like to play through it and then replay it back and try to check everything off. That's kind of like what I do. For others, like LA Noire, I like to get it right first try because I'm so carried away in the world and the narrative that I want to do it right. I want to bring justice and accuse the right person. I gotta say, actually, LA Noire was one of those games which was really irritating. That actually tried my patience because the consequences and stuff for kind of screwing up were very unsatisfying. He says, I think a few things come forward reflecting back on myself. The importance of choice, the impact of failure, immersion into the narration world, but also personality. If you are a perfectionist, competitive, or you are laid back and chilled and just enjoying whatever comes on your way. Additional to that is how much urgency you feel to get it right. I myself am pretty much a perfectionist and can be very competitive. I like to be or become good at things. I love to learn, and sometimes seeing how somebody else deals with a problem without any commentary can be enough to let me see what I can improve on myself. I'm a big racing fan, and in racing games you see these kind of personalities in drivers. Some are perfectionists, some like to dominate a race, others qualify at the back and love to have a comeback race and see how far up a grid they can get. Others see one thing go wrong and they just leave the race. It's largely personality that's going to drive your way to approach a race game. Keep up the videos, hope to see more Tannenberg. Yeah, I like Tannenberg, it's good. But basically, everybody's different. Yeah, I think this is something that we can agree on. People play games for different reasons. But, it is interesting, I think, perhaps, to look at the other side of the coin, to think about things outside your own perspective. And, this is sometimes what I say when you look at like something like Battlefield, which is why I continue to talk about Battlefield, because I think it's probably one of the most interesting games when it comes to not just its design, style, mechanics, but also the audience that it attracts. For the longest time, it was a game which attracted a very specific style of player, but now now you could argue even that those players have disappeared, but the point that I get to is that sometimes when you're playing, say, Battlefield, you can be frustrated because you're like, why are these people not playing towards the way that I want to play it? And that's the difference between multiplayer and single player. Is in single player, you can really play however you want to. That is the beauty of a single player game. You can play as slow as you like, as fast as you like, as completed as you like, as failed or successful as you like. You can play it however you want to, which is why I find it so laughable when you see editorials saying like the death of single player games. Please, don't be absurd. Single player games will always exist because they give the absolute most customizable experience for players. It enables people to play however they want to play with no infractions or other kind of elements to other players. But you bring that to a multiplayer environment and suddenly things get turned upside down, because you have a lot of people all in the same space but probably all playing with slightly different reasoning. Maybe somebody's on there, they just want to catch a quick 10-minute game. Maybe somebody's been there like literally day in, day out, they're grinding, they want a really specific weapon and that is the only thing they care about. Maybe you have one person in there who's really playing for the win and he feels like the rest of his team are not pulling their weight. It's everyone's got a different agenda there, and that's really what it comes to. But we were talking mainly about single player games and about, again, not just like, hey, other players exist, because this is something that we know people play for different reasons. But what I was saying, and the real core of what I was getting to, was, as I said before, the fact that if you play a certain way, sometimes it's not a bad thing to change that up and maybe think, maybe I should play a different way. And I think it goes mainly one way. Like, if you are playing with a quite open mind and an attitude of like, hey, just whatever comes what may, well, it's not really probably going to gain you a lot of an experience to suddenly become this super hardcore completionist. I can't really see that you would probably gain a lot from that. If you were somebody who generally didn't care in general, I doubt that you would gain much from that. But if you're the kind of player that always plays a really completionist perspective and a really kind of, I must know everything, I must get all the information, etc., I would say maybe just chill out, maybe just maybe try a game that you've never tried before and just think, hey, this time I'm going to try this with a completely blank approach. I'm going to go in really kind of just, we're going to see what happens, and then after that come back and then do it with a more completionist way. You don't always need to know what all those editorials that always say in game online game forums and not forums, online game sites and stuff. It's always like, 10 things I wish I knew before I played X game. It's like, no, how about I'll find out those things, and I don't wish I knew those things, because, as I say, sometimes learning those things is part of the experience, and by knowing that ahead of time, you're actually cheating yourself out of an experience that in that game that you paid for. So now we come to part 2 for this week's Below the Line. This is where I discuss a topic, and then you guys will leave your thoughts down below for the next video where I pick out the best comments. I wrote a lot for this one today, so let's try and get through this quickly. It relates to PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, their assertion that the game is, quote, being ripped off. Now, in an article posted by the BBC today, which interviewed PlayerUnknown Brendan Green about his complaints that other games are ripping off elements of Pubg. The problem is, he didn't specifically highlight what elements or what other games are doing this ripping off. It was very vague, so it really makes it difficult to actually criticize. Some people have pointed to obscure Chinese games that are literally, I guess, re-ups of Pubg, but I find it really hard to believe that he's referring to that, especially with some of the history there. So I wonder if it is instead aiming more at something like Fortnite, which has become more and more popular of late. Full disclosure, I haven't played it. It's not something I'm specifically interested in, but I do know that it connects through to this, and it's something that a lot of people are really playing. That's on the up and up. Now you might remember though that back in September, this topic was already raised around the idea of games mimicking Pubg. Bluehole said back then in September that they were contemplating, quote, further action in regards to Fortnite. They were concerned that Fortnite was maybe replicating the experience for which Pubg is known. I think that wording is very relevant. They were replicating the experience. To which I say, that's a fucking stupid thing to say even then, and it still is now. It's replicating the gameplay for which Pubg is known. What does that even mean? It's a meaningless phrase that boils down to, we want to be the only game known for that kind of style gameplay. Well, I'm sorry, but it just doesn't work that way. I've also, in looking around today, seen Brendan Green, PlayerUnknown, repeatedly stating that he wants other companies to enter the same sphere, that sphere of the Battle Royale, and that they should, he says this repeatedly, put their own spin on the game mode and not just make a carbon copy. The problem is, this seems to really contradict what he is saying later. The two things don't seem to go together. And again, some clarification here, being more specific, would be very helpful. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty certain Fortnite could not have put more of their own spin onto it in both art style and gameplay. They seem to bear very little similarity at all beyond the very base concept of a battle royale. So back to this issue with Brendan's comments that they were very generalized and non-specific. I'm not sure what suddenly sparked him to speak up on this again, because he really didn't give any further clarification. He just said, I want this genre of games to grow, and for that to happen, you need new and interesting spins on the game mode. And again, I would say that that's Brendan's opinion. He's probably right, but devil's advocate, if you get to keep the game as the one provider of that specific style of BR content, that seems a pretty sure way to make sure that you keep your place at the top. And again, it seems just contradictory. Still, he goes on to say that something baffling. He says there's no intellectual property protection in games. But that's just out and out false. It's a bizarre thing to say, and it's just really surprising and strange for somebody leading one of the year's most popular releases to come out and say that. And then he continues by saying, in movies and music there is intellectual property protection, and you can really look after your work. In gaming, that doesn't exist yet. It doesn't exist yet, that's what he said, and it's something that should be looked into. He also says, you're protecting the work of artists, basically. Games are art for a large part, and so I think it's important they are protected. Now, the strange thing is, they are already protected, and these are already things which all completely exist. So again, it's very vague, it's very non-specific, and it also just doesn't make any sense. He also says, essentially games can be ripped off at an early level by, say, somebody ripping your idea, boosting a bigger budget in, releasing it ahead of you, and then, basically saying that's going to make your game popular. Now that is genuinely a problem. That is a problem, I think, for indie developers. But again, technically the protections do exist for that. He said that this is something the industry needs to look into. I don't really know what that means. So here's the problem. Intellectual property exists in gaming as it does with almost any creative work created. It already exists. The problem is that games are just a lot more complicated than a song or an artwork, to a point. So you can write a song, okay, you can write a song, it's lyrics, it's music. It's pretty clear what is yours and who owns it. Let's remember though that songs can be sampled as well. Let's consider artwork. If you make an artwork, you own that intellectual property. It's that simple. You put a mark on a paper, you own it. But you can take somebody's artwork, and if you alter it enough of a degree, which by the way is this strange unknown grey line, then it can also become yours as well. So video games constitute a mass of ideas. Their artwork, their designs, they're not easy, they're not simple to define, or not as simple to define in terms of intellectual property as other creative things are. Also, it seems to me that what Brendan Green, PlayerUnknown, wants to be able to protect with Battlegrounds as just to basically make it its own entity that cannot be replicated. I could be wrong on this, but again, he wasn't specific, so it's very hard to know what he meant. If he laid it out and said, this element of our game is being ripped off and we want it protected, you could make a more clear case. But it was all very vague, and it makes it very difficult to actually interpret what it was he was getting at. Still, this is an interesting area, so I might actually consider a separate video on it as well. But let's try to get to the root cause here. What is PlayerUnknown and Bluehole considering that other games are apparently ripping off? To me, you've only got a few possibilities that I could think of. the art, the design and UI style, the game mode concept, and the game mechanics. Now, Battlegrounds, when you actually break it down, is a very simple concept brought from Battle Royale. It's a bunch of players, you land on an island, you fight to the death. It's pretty simple. You pick up whatever you can to fight with on the way, and you're forced into an ever-encroaching space. Last player standing wins. Quite honestly, all the things that they're complaining about, in terms of protection, etc., like I say, already exist. They just have to actually be applied for and enforced if they believe their concept qualifies. They could make legal cases against other companies that they have potentially infringed on their game if they thought they had a strong case. Now, as to why they haven't done this, perhaps that speaks for itself, because maybe they realise they actually don't have a particularly strong case because there isn't anything specifically unique enough to actually implement and win that case, and maybe that frustrates them. So what is intellectual property? Now firstly, I'm no expert. I just did some reading today on the subject and this is what I found out, because it's not that hard. Intellectual property is actually several things. It covers patents, copyrights, trademarks and trade secrets. First, a patent. Now, a patent refers to protection of inventions or ideas from being copied. You must apply, though, for a patent. It's not just something that you have passively that you just automatically own, as you might when you, for example, create a work of art. So a patent might protect anything new and unique. This could be a revolutionary game mechanic, a UI element, a graphics technique, a mechanical element, designs like your icons, your artwork, your characters. Patents exist to essentially provide you with a powerful tool to prevent others from using your concept. That is the point of it, to hold essentially a monopoly on that concept. The difficulty is that a patent must be highly specific. It must also be unique and original. And at the same time, if you focus too narrowly, then a competitor could actually take your base design, make a change, and then still be free to use that same concept, as they wouldn't be directly replicating it. If used correctly, a patent can provide a really good protection against competitors who want to modify your idea. Now, the issue with Pubg and a patent is that beyond maybe the art style, there's really nothing specifically unique about it when you really break it down. The concept of a battle royale, that's not new or unique. Neither is the idea of a game offering a free-for-all fight to the death. Neither are the mechanics. The only thing I thought might vaguely qualify would be that encroaching circle that causes damage over time. But for anything like that art and so on, it's all protected, it's already existing. Now copyrights. Now copyrights protect the expression of an idea, but not the idea itself. And that's really important. So in reference to games, they protect the artwork. Copyrights, they protect the artwork, the sounds, the source code of a game. So again, Brendan's assertion that music and art have better protection than games, that's just not accurate. You cannot copy the images and sounds or underlying program used during a game and then just put that into your own. What copyright does not cover is the protection of an idea. An idea like, say, a bunch of players fighting to the death on an island to the last man standing, or capturing a flag and returning it to your base, or sector control game modes, or collecting equipment at random across an area. This is why we are able to have, for example, genres of games. If copyright did not work in this way, you wouldn't be able to have like 100 different FPS games or third-person adventure games and so on, because if the rights around those games were so restrictive that anything like a concept was locked down so harshly, you really couldn't easily create anything new. So unlike a patent, a copyright exists as soon as you were to say, save your code, sketch your artwork, record audio. It passively exists already. So for Pubg, all of its art, design, its assets, they're already protected. But the concept of a battle royale game mode, even its general mechanics, they are likely not. These would likely not be exclusively protected until they were patented, if they even could be. So, two other brief things to mention. Trademarks. Now, these protect your brand. It's usually something like a name or a symbol, and these are going to be registered at a trademark office. Now, these are a powerful foundation for any brand or concept. So something like Pubg, that will likely be trademarked and completely unusable by anybody else. And these are critically important. This is how people know they're getting the real deal. They're choosing brands or products that they trust and not a poor imitation. Now next, also trade secrets, and this doesn't sound like a form of intellectual property, but apparently it is. Trade secrets is basically a piece of information that you want to keep secret. And what you essentially have to show is that it's basically something that has inherent value to you as a business and that you don't want it disclosed publicly. So this might be a working process or say a game engine that your company designed and wants to use exclusively. This should be very easy to protect because all you got to really do is simply ensure your employees are signing a legal document to ensure that they're not going to share that private information if they were to say move to a different company later. And when it comes to intellectual property, that's really it. Honestly, once you get your head around it, it's really not that complicated at all. It also doesn't take much to realise that, unfortunately, what Brendan Green, Player Unknown, is advocating, as I say, already exists. You can easily protect nearly all of your created elements of your game, including how they are expressed. What you can't do without a patent is lock down an idea itself, a game mode, or a game mechanic. Now, I hope that Brendan does want to see more Battle Royale style game modes released because competition is healthy and a monopoly is never a good thing. But if he does have points to make about others ripping off from original GameWorks, it would be very helpful to be more specific because without being specific, people can't look into that, they can't flag it, they can't criticize, they can't, generally make people aware. Making generalizations without naming anybody or any company or any product really doesn't achieve anything. Neither does saying it's something the gaming industry needs to look at. Who's going to look at that? Who would be placed to do so? Who's going to decide that? It really doesn't mean anything. And it's also, as I said before, strange to make criticisms or complaints about systems and practices like patents and copyrights, which have really existed for a long time, are not that difficult to understand. And if you're running a big game and a big company, you probably should have your head around that. So, as I say, it's all kind of vague and strange, and it makes me really wonder, what are they getting at? What's the end goal here? And what was the point of it all? Interested in your thoughts on this down below, guys. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.